To create great sounding masters, we need three things: a great sounding mix, a direction for where you want to end up, and a workflow which helps get you there. Hi, I'm Nicholas De Lorenzo, and today I'll share with you my perfect mastering workflow which I use for sessions every day. I'll also share a few of the tools and processes I use to set up, process, print, export, and deliver great sounding masters. For my job as a mastering engineer, my efforts are split into doing two things: managing my clients and projects, and delivering those results. So I have a workflow which allows me to be in direct communication with my clients throughout the process, as well as my actual process of mastering records, which give me consistent results. Firstly, I have a 60-minute period blocked out every single morning for listening sessions. Any new material which comes in, I have to listen to up front. Nothing gets put on a calendar until I've listened to it, quality controlled it, and given it a tick of approval. This weeds out any potential issues that can happen down the line during the mastering process. Now, for every mix which comes in, I'm listening for the following: are there any audible distortion or artifacts present? How is the low-end translation between the bass and the kick? How is the energy balance between low frequencies and the top line? How is the mid-range balance between the low mids and the upper mids? What is the overall tonal balance or shape between the low frequencies and the high frequencies? How does the dynamic composition stack up between the punchiness of the transients and the focal point of the music? How is the overall stereo field balance? And is there any excessive sibilance present? If any of these aspects are a cause for concern when it comes to mastering, I'll flag this in an email with a specific note for consideration to remedy an offending element in the mix prior to mastering. I'll also leave a calendar link to book a call if they need to clarify any of the details before making changes. If the mix is void of any errors ahead of mastering, well then I'll add it to my reminders list to do during my admin time, which directly follows after my listening time because it's just a natural progression. If I'm listening to things, signing off on them, then next make sure during my admin time I'm getting the invoices, getting the bookings out for those listening sessions. In my booking emails, I'll ask 3 critical questions which help brief me for mastering. Is there anything you'd like the mastering to highlight? Is there anything you're conscious of in these mixes? And do you have any releases you'd like me to reference? As well as this, again, I'll leave a link to my Calendly, so if they need to have a conversation, if they want to talk anything through, they can hop on the phone and do that and just simply put a booking in my calendar for a call. Data integrity, management, and access is a critical point of any media-based operation. To manage this, I've created a macro on Mac Automator, which generates my projects folders on a synchronized Dropbox subscription with an according hierarchy to help me manage projects assets I receive for studio sessions I'm working on and deliverables I send off to clients. These folders synchronize between my studio computer, Dropbox cloud service, laptop, and remain accessible to me through my Dropbox app on my iPhone, meaning I can always access some portion of the project if I'm on the go or clients need something delivered to them and I don't have direct access to my studio computer. Ahead of the session, it's important to get some critical information down from the assets my clients provide me. Using the Get Info function on the Mac, I'm able to note the sample rate and bit depth of the mixes coming in, and that's important because I want to make sure the sample rate of all my sessions at the native sample rate the mix is being provided to me in. I also want to access the waveform stats in Isotope Audio Editor to make note of the true peak level and the maximum short-term loudness and at what time markers they occur to then reference in my session for when I'm setting up my gain staging. I start a new session in my DAW from my mastering template at the native sample rate of the assets. This template has all my routings and channels laid out for audio restoration, mastering, processing, monitoring tools, and capturing alternate prints for -1 decibel true peak Apple digital masters. I drag the assets in for the session on both my processing channel and compare channel for referencing, and I'll also begin placing markers for the true peak and short-term loudness, as these will directly affect both my gain staging and dynamics processing throughout the chain. I will then clip gain up or down the material to meet the true peak value of -6 decibels, providing me ample headroom through my chain for mastering. The first pass is one of the most critical aspects of mastering. This is a time where there's no hands on deck, I just sit down and listen to everything again, start to end. Noting what is working and translating well in the mix and what aspects may need attending to. If any corrective or surgical or restorative processes have to take place, this is where it will happen. I like doing all this work up front, cleaning up the audio, making sure that no resonances, no clicks, no pops, no artifacts that may have still slipped through are there, and everything is remedied to the best of its solution, so that way I don't have to circle back at a later time after I've already dialed in my chain and then potentially have to start chasing my tail while I'm finishing up a project. Often major issues with any audio are weeded out during the QC process when I'm doing my listening sessions each morning, so this is not really that much of an issue. Given the mix is sitting in a space where I'm not hearing anything too offensive to the ears, things are just naturally flowing, then I can start to approach and deal with the dynamics of the material. And for this, there are two sort of aspects of dynamics I'm considering, and they are macro and micro dynamics. Macro dynamics are critical in telling the story of the music. They're the difference in volume between the loudest and the softest parts of passages throughout a piece of music. Are the loud parts relatively loud compared to the softer verses? Are the crescendos hitting a high point, or are they lacking gusto? These are all important things to take into consideration, and simple movements like clip gaining a passage half a decibel up or down, or creating a long fade of a crescendo can really help the impact of the music on the overall dynamics of what we're listening to. Microdynamics are critical to detailing the articulation, rhythm, and movement of individual notes being played, and often to manage this, I'll be using either downward compression or upward compression depending on what the material calls for. To my ears, I'm trying to listen to the transient information and sustain of the mix. Does this sound together? Does it sound musical? Is it engaging me as a listener? I typically use downward compression when I want to change the relationship of the transient information to the sustain of the material, and I typically use upward compression when I want to change the relationship of the body or sustain of the material to the transient information. With the macrodynamics and microdynamics sitting well, I can then opt to choose whether I want to make any tonal changes to the overall material. And my main tool for this in the box is FabFilter Pro Q3. My aim of EQing here is to create a neutral balance which when I go through my analog chain and start pushing level will translate favorably. If I start with too bright of a signal when I'm pushing level, things will start to become harsh, tinny, abrasive. If I start with too boomy and fat of a signal, the low end will control all my limiting and compression down the line. With EQ, I'm aiming to approach the material with broad strokes. On FabFilter Pro Q3, a Q factor of 2 is the equivalent of 1 octave, and I'm aiming to make the changes with a series of small cuts and boosts known as yin-yang EQ. I opt for yin-yang EQ as it avoids me over boosting or over cutting any particular frequency range and finding the path of least resistance when it comes to manipulating the tone of a master. With a signal that is well controlled both dynamically and tonally, it's time for me to go to my outboard gear. Here, I'm considering how the tools at my disposal can further enhance a well-balanced signal. Dynamically, I can further enhance the material with the Manley Varimu. This compressor is unique in that the ratio of compression varies with the level and doesn't compromise the microdynamic and transient detail without offending the musicality of the material. And tonally, I can manage the signal pre-compression with the high voltage EQ6S or the barrier port and net EQ ahead of hitting my A to D. Loudness is the final frontier in mastering. Now, whilst normalization algorithms has dulled the loudness wars, it's still important for me to take into consideration the final presentation of this master. Much of the loudness I achieve is caused by driving my A to D converters. Similarly, this can be emulated with soft clipping in the box, and here is where my time for using those markers which I started in the setup of my session come into effect. I can monitor the loudest peaks of the material and the loudest passages of the material to make sure no artifacts are being introduced, no distortion, no unmusical sounding compression artifacts are being introduced when I'm pushing the level. Before committing to this master, I'll usually have a coffee, get out of the room to check emails or post something to social media, and just give my ears some space. Before we move on with this video, I'd like to mention you can purchase the mastering template I use from a link in the description below for $5. I made this available for ProTools users, and it's a small fee which goes a long way to supporting the channel. Having rested my ears, I'll come back to the desk to listen through the material start to end. If everything passes, it's good to go off and get printed. Now, with everything dialed in, I can record on my capture tracks and record the process signal in real time. This is a critical part of the mastering process as it acts as my last step to quality control and ensure everything sounds great. Typically, while this is being printed, I will document my processing chain, decisions I've made, and recall notes for analog gear I've used. Ahead of exporting, I will top and tail the beginning and the end of the track, make sure the lead time is appropriate ahead of the first note and the tail of the track comes to a natural finish. I'll consolidate these edits and rename the regions for export using standard naming conventions outlined in technical document AES TD 1002.2.15-02. I will then export these at the native sample rate and bit depth of the session as lossless.wav to the deliverables folder laid out during earlier stages of the mastering process, and I'll produce an MP3 version for press kits and a 16-bit version for CDs using Isotope's batch editor where I can drag, drop, process and work on a series of files in succession of one another. Finally, I'll deliver my work to clients using the Dropbox link to the deliverables folders in the projects folder on Dropbox, leaving my notes from the session and keeping communication open if any revisions are to be requested. Guys, thank you for following this whole saga of my mastering workflow. I hope you got something from this. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be making more of these videos. These are exciting to make. It's exciting to just sort of explore more of what I do in video format. So guys, until next time, take care.